Over the past 2 decades, PlayStation has become a household name synonymous with gaming. Whether players remember classics like Bugs Bunny and Taz Time Busters with siblings, experiencing the heartbreaking opening of The Last of Us for the first time, or zipping through New York at high speed as Spider-Man, PlayStation have been responsible for creating fond gaming memories for millions of people around the world. With the release of each console marking the start of a new chapter in gaming, Sony's flagship brand continuously evolved and still shows no signs of slowing down. I'm Jess from WhatCulture, and here is the evolution of PlayStation. Number 10. The birth of PlayStation. Before PlayStation, it was Nintendo and Sega who dominated the gaming scene in the 1980s. The thought of competing with these industry titans seemed impossible, but then Sony arrived on the scene and changed everything. The electronics giant was eager to enter the entertainment industry with a particular interest in the video game scene. They dealt with Nintendo to create a CD-ROM for the upcoming Super NES. However, disaster struck for Sony when Nintendo abruptly ended the partnership by announcing they'd be teaming up with rivals Philips instead. Despite this early blow, Sony were undeterred and forged on to create their own console instead. Throughout the following years, the team at Sony, headed by Ken Kutaragi, worked to recruit various studios to help develop third-party games for what would become the PlayStation. Huge names like Namco and Ubisoft would soon be on board, with Sony later purchasing UK studio Psygnosis to become their first in-house team, going on to make iconic racing game Wipeout. Despite heavy competition from the Sega Saturn, the PlayStation performed remarkably well in Japan, selling 100,000 units on its first day alone. Things were just getting started for Sony, with much bigger surprises still to come. Number 9. A new era of games. The PlayStation came at a pivotal point in gaming history. Games were now embracing 3D graphics, which would revolutionize how they could be played. Moreover, CD-ROMs were far cheaper to manufacture than cartridges, which meant that developers could now afford to take more risks than they did before. The result was the perfect storm for developers to experiment more, creating game mechanics and overall experiences that no one thought were possible. Within the first few years of the PlayStation's existence, players in the 90s were treated to the likes of Crash Bandicoot, Tomb Raider, Metal Gear Solid, Resident Evil, and way more great games. Each of these weren't just massive successes, they'd also go on to establish renowned franchises and even entire genres. As fantastic as these initial hits were, developers were still trying to figure out how 3D games could even work, with analog sticks not becoming standard until 3 years after the console launched. Fixed camera angles, tank controls, and fiddling with the bumper buttons to change perspective were how many players first experienced 3D gaming. Despite having some rough edges, PlayStation had hit the ground running, ushering in a whole new era of gaming. Number 8. PlayStation 2 takes over. After the PlayStation cemented Sony as a major competitor in the games industry, their success only grew further with the release of the PlayStation 2 in 2000. Selling a staggering 155 million units and getting support up until 2014, the PS2 still stands as the best-selling console of all time. Home to all-timers like Grand Theft Auto San Andreas, Metal Gear Solid 2, The Simpsons Hit and Run, Ratchet & Clank, Time Splitters 2, and so many more, the PS2 continued to push the boundaries of what games could be. And with a library totaling over 4,000 games, there was no shortage of amazing titles that appealed to a wide variety of tastes. A key reason for the PS2's runaway success was that it made the technological leap to use DVDs. Not only did this make the console the cheapest DVD player on the market at the time, an appealing reason for many non-gamers to pick one up, but this move gave developers more memory to play with, allowing them to make their games even bigger than before. This more powerful technology meant that games were becoming more cinematic. Developers could now tell grander stories within larger worlds, creating gaming memories that we'd never forget. Number 7. Going portable. Releasing the most popular console of all time wasn't enough for Sony. They also had their sights on the handheld market, releasing the PlayStation Portable in 2005. Although it wasn't Sony's first handheld offering, the Pocket Station peripheral hit Japanese shelves in 1999, the PSP was their first serious attempt to compete with the Nintendo DS and, of course, the Game Boy Advance. First announced at E3 in 2003, the PSP was touted as being able to run games at a similar level as the PlayStation 2, using small Sony-patented UMD discs. Moreover, the handheld console would also have internet connectivity and allow users to watch DVD quality movies. It could do far more than what the DS could, and subsequently became a massive hit around the world. Sony would continue to support its newest member of the family for years to come, offering firmware updates that brought new features alongside releasing some truly excellent games like GTA Liberty City Stories and Metal Gear Solid Peace Walker, which players could enjoy wherever they went. Meanwhile, PS2 continued to impress. The release of the iToy peripheral and brand new slim version of the console kept things fresh as Sony moved towards the next generation. Number 6. A bad start for the PlayStation 3. After over half a decade of playing an expansive catalogue of legendary titles, every PS2 owner wondered what Sony could accomplish with their next machine. The answer came with the announcement of the PlayStation 3 in 2005. With the move to Blu-ray discs and HD displays coupled with the console's powerful cell processor, the PS3 looked to be on track as another instant hit. While this console would become known for some of the best games of the generation, we're talking Last of Us, Uncharted 2, and Infamous, it would take some time for the PS3 to earn this reputation. The early years simply didn't go as Sony or fans would have hoped. One of the biggest issues Sony faced was the console's price. Set at a whopping $499 for the cheaper 20GB model, the PS3 was far more expensive than the $399 Xbox 360. Moreover, third-party studios likewise had trouble developing on Sony's new hardware, meaning that games that weren't made by in-house dev teams looked and played better on the rival's system. It was a terrible start to the 7th generation for Sony, but things would improve. Number 5. The PS3's golden years. Despite the PlayStation 3's disappointing launch, it wasn't all bad. Although teething problems with the console's cell processor meant that third-party games performed poorer on this more expensive system, first-party titles were nevertheless some of the best-looking games out there. Titles like Metal Gear Solid 4, Little Big Planet, and Ratchet & Clank Futures, Tools of Destruction showed people what the PS3 was capable of, and the best was still yet to come. After trailing behind Microsoft for years, Sony would make a great comeback with a slimmer, cheaper PS3, which made picking up the console a much more viable option. More importantly than that though, the more experience developers had making games this generation, the better that they got at utilizing that PS3 hardware. Games only got more visually stunning throughout the console's life, giving players the likes of The Last of Us, Heavy Rain, and Beyond Two Souls, as just some titles that still really hold up today. This generation was when Sony excelled at delivering narrative-driven cinematic experiences. Now that the games themselves looked and played better than ever, the stories they told resonated more with those who played them. Number 4. Winning a console generation. Sony had learned their lesson after the disastrous launch of the PlayStation 3 when it came around time to announce its successor, the PlayStation 4. Now, this wouldn't just become the place to play some of the best games of the last decade, it had put the industry giants back on top. Alongside the leap in hardware power, the 8th console generation sought to revolutionize the gaming experience again, this time putting a focus on connectivity. For the PS4, this meant adding a dedicated share button to the controller, the ability to instantly resume games, and to play remotely using follow-up handheld system, the PS Vita. The controller was also overhauled with the addition of a trackpad, microphone, and LED light to add extra layers of interactivity. While Sony had a lot going for its new console, part of the PS4's early success was, of course, due to Microsoft's misjudged decisions for the Xbox One, which was, if you don't remember, really their PlayStation 3 launch. With the console originally needing to be connected to the internet for it to be usable, alongside the company's controversial stance on DRM, Sony was put in a default advantageous position ahead of the upcoming console's launch. Microsoft's blunder aside though, the PS4 was still a spectacular console. Number 3, the best generation so far. Despite Xbox's best efforts to put out the fires of its E3 2013 presentation, the damage had already been done. players flocked to buy the PS4 at launch, making it the fastest selling PlayStation of all time. And they'd have no shortage of outstanding games to play throughout its life cycle either. This generation would see Sony deliver even more of the cinematic first-party exclusives that consoles have become known for, with the likes of Until Dawn, The Order 1886, and Uncharted 4 being just some of the games players could experience in the first years of the console's life. Later, the arrivals of Marvel's Spider-Man, The Last of Us Part 2, Ghost of Tsushima, and way more games would only further cement the PS4's library of games as being one of the best out there. Another crowning jewel of the PS4's catalogue was its collection of remakes, which reimagined fan-favourite titles from previous generations. Whether that was The Last Guardian, Ratchet & Clank, or Shadow of the Colossus, newcomers could now experience these for the very first time, while older fans could revisit their favourites in gloriously rendered fidelity. PlayStation had really never been better than this. Number 2, the most powerful PlayStation yet. When the time came for the PS5's arrival, the release of the Xbox One X and PS4 Pro had set new performance benchmarks for gameplay. With considerable horsepower under the newest PlayStation's hood, games now looked and played better than ever, with higher frame rates, sharp 4K resolutions, ray trace lighting, and an SSD drive significantly reducing load times. Sheer computing power wasn't all that the PlayStation 5 had to offer though. The updated DualSense controllers brought a new way for players to interact. Alongside haptic feedback giving precise responses to in-game actions, adaptive triggers enabled players to feel the tension of drawing a bowstring and the impact of firing a gun. The difference was really tangible. Despite the PS5's high specs, there have been a disappointing number of new games that show exactly what the console is capable of. Instead, Sony released next-gen updates for a selection of existing games, so players could see how much of a difference the PS5's graphical power could achieve. Ghost of Tsushima's director's cut, for example, was a remarkable step up from the PS4, as it made the already stunning world look even better. The PS5 generation remains somewhat rocky, all told, and it hasn't all been plain sailing. Number 1, an uncertain future. Although Sony have released the occasional first-party game for the PlayStation 5, the current list of titles this time have been noticeably shorter than previous generations. Rather than releasing more cinematic single-player experiences that players have come to expect from Sony after the past 20 years, the company has made a habit of remaking older games with high price tags, with the remake of Silent Hill 2 being the most recent example. While the likes of Astro Bot show that Sony are still capable of making outstanding games, these are sort of becoming the exception, with live service shooter Concord infamously going offline 2 weeks after launch. The recent announcement of the PS5 Pro has likewise raised some eyebrows amongst players. In addition to its eye-watering $700 price tag, the absence of a disk drive and vertical stand, both of which are sold separately, suggests Sony are repeating the same mistakes they made with the release of the PS3. Moreover, with the reveal event showing only older games that have been enhanced for the new console, there are currently no truly next-gen games to justify purchasing one. Also, the thing looks like a gigantic A5 folder. That's neither here nor there, nor is it in the script, but I feel like somebody needs to say it. Despite Sony's recent missteps, PlayStation isn't going anywhere anytime soon, and it's been one hell of a journey to get here in the first place.